Today's episode, it's actually a lot of fun, or it was a lot of fun to have the conversation. It's with David Charlson, who he has been a coach of mine. He has been a close friend of mine, and he brings a lot to the table. He's a serial entrepreneur. He's launched and sold multi-million-dollar businesses. He's been in the mortgage industry. The list goes on, but really his passion is working with high-performing clients, helping them stay connected as well as achieving really good things and juggling the balance of that, which sometimes, I don't know about you, but being connected and setting aside time for myself, as well as chasing goals and checking off the to-dos, it can be tricky at times. And so we get into the weeds of what does that balance look like? And how do you navigate that in a successful way, staying connected to your authentic self while accomplishing and achieving really cool things? Not only this episode, but also upcoming episodes, we've got some really exciting guests that I'm chomping at the bit to share with you guys, but I don't want to say anything until we drop it. So be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, so that way you don't miss out whenever those guests come on. And without further ado, let's dive into the conversation of what does it look like to have healthy masculinity connected to your authentic self within the business world and or achieving really high goals that you may be pursuing. Men, we are not simple, chest-thumping, rock-smashing, fire-starting barbarians. We have depth. We intensely feel. We are scared, yet brave. We love to have fun. We're imperfect and make mistakes. We're compassionate and loving. We are multifaceted. Let's explore the reality of masculinity together. Well, today, I feel like today's a special treat because for me personally, but also for people that are listening, because the treat for me is anytime I get to interact with our guest today, my life is better for it. And I consider myself a wealthy man because of the friendships that I have. And he is in that inner circle of friendships that make me feel wealthy. And that is David Charlson. He's been one of my closest friends. He's been a coach. He's been a mentor. He's been stepped into the father figure role at times, the older brother role at times, just an all-around good man. And I'm really excited about diving into the topic of what we're going to be discussing today. But without further ado, Dave, thanks so much for taking the time to be on the podcast today.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for having me, Josh.
Yeah, absolutely. So today, and as we get into the weeds of everything, we'll unpack more and more as to why specifically your passion and your qualification of working with executive level leaders, whether that be in the business realm or, if you're an entrepreneur, whatever it may be, but being that high performer, that high level executive. Dave, you've managed to do that at the same time staying grounded and more, I would say even more so than grounded, it's staying connected to your heart in the process of that, and then leading from that place. So with all that said, I'm curious from your perspective, how would you define emotional health, just overarching emotional health, from like as an executive leader, from that executive leadership position? What does emotional health even look like to start with?
Well, I think the foundation of emotional health is deeper and deeper connection to your authentic self. Like, one of the quickest ways to, when you get knocked off center in any role, whether you're an athlete or creative or an executive, usually the source of being off and feeling, like your emotional health is off, like your thought patterns, your emotional patterns are off, is usually because you've you're in some kind of default self-protective pattern, and it's because you've lost connection with your authentic self. So I like to think of what's the, not the symptom, but what's the source. And I think for most part that's the source.
Sure. How would you define, because I have coached this, etc., but for you, for your perspective, what is your authentic self? Like getting okay, so you get off kilter from that. I understand that. Get back to that, but some men don't even know what that is or what that means or
Right.
can't even define
Yeah.
that.
Well, it is elusive, and that's part of the problem. That's what makes it so difficult, and that's why people need coaches like you and I. Um,
Yeah.
but I will say this: one of the quickest and easiest ways to diagnose or figure out, well, who am I really, right? Like, what is a real man? What's my true? Is watch movies. And it's going to sound like a prescription for escapism, but it's not. So when you're escaping watching a movie, you might as well make the time useful.
Yeah.
And so, I like to say, when you're watching a movie, which character do you identify with, and which character do you kind of know that you are, but you wish you weren't. So the character that you identify with, that's the hero, the one that where you're like, yes, that's who I want to be. That resonates with me.
Mhm.
Um, that's a clue of who your true self is. But the one that oftentimes there's a character in there that has character flaws also, or even the main character might have character flaws. And when you identify with those character flaws, but it kind of makes you cringe, that's an idea of where some of your pain and where some of your misalignment might be. But
Hmm.
there's lots of ways to. It doesn't have to just be a movie, but it's
Well,
paying
actually,
attention. Yeah, go ahead.
I want to stay on that because I've never thought of it that way, and I think that's fascinating. Um, but to connect to the authentic self, in theory, I don't disagree with you, and I don't even disagree with what you're saying. But I can see, at times when, just from my own personal life, when as a teenager, when my family was falling apart, my parents' marriage was falling apart, and I was in a lot of pain. If I watched a movie from that place of pain, I I would have, because I'm a little bit more rebellious and I'm a maverick, and I would have connected to identity, or some of my identity could have very easily connected to the villain, or to, because I felt, justified, or even if it was wrong, he stood up for himself or manipulated people, etc. Um, so I guess the question in that is, how do you distinguish? Because in a perfect world, I hear what you're saying. You want to gravitate to the hero and not to the villain. That's way oversimplifying what you're saying. But
Mhm.
in a just, um, but pain can also cause you to connect to the villain. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
So how do you
Um,
distinguish that?
well, um, how do you distinguish if you're connecting to the villain or not? Usually, sometimes you're in a distorted place and you don't know it. So, um, and when you're in a distorted place and you don't know it, you're going to get feedback from those in the world that love you,
Mm,
then the trick becomes, how do I interpret that feedback? If the feedback is like consistently like, hey, you're off course, you're becoming the villain, eventually it catches up with you and kind of pops you out of it. So I mean, there are times where we get off course, and I would say the only advice I'd give is, be open to feedback. There are times when you are the rebel and the maverick and you are on the right course and all the feedback you're getting is wrong because but usually, let's say you're breaking free from a crowd you've been a part of that doesn't want you to grow, and you're now entering into, you know there's going to be new people in your life that you're going to want to get feedback from. And if you're on the villain course, if several groups are giving you the same feedback loop that's saying you're off course, then you should listen to that.
got it. Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
You
Um,
can't see who you really are on. This is the paradox of it. To be who you truly are, you need to sometimes ignore feedback completely and just go for it, right? And at the same
sure.
time, if you do that too aggressively, you could end up in left field and in a spot where you're like, oh my god, I'm the villain. I didn't
Yeah,
I didn't want to end up here. So
and I think. Oh, go
it's a
ahead.
dichotomy, right, between pushing and being authentic, but also realizing that you're always going to have blind spots and that your community is going to be the feedback loop that you get, you take it with a grain of salt, but you do need to be open to having a feedback loop.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I would say, yeah, I mean, it's sometimes way overused in self-development spaces, but giving yourself grace, because there is an aspect of, especially if you've been suppressed, that pendulum can swing, right?
Yeah.
And so if the pendulum swings in your exploration of trying to break out of something, to give yourself grace when you catch that or realize it, to then find your center in that pendulum to find a healthy path forward.
Yeah, I think what we've just revealed right now is that the path towards authentic expression and being connected to your authentic self is a challenging one, right? I mean, just in the few minutes we've talked here,
Yeah.
we're already talking about the the pitfalls and the traps and the, you know, and so to your point, what you're saying is grace and compassion for yourself is critical, because you are going to get it wrong. You know, sometimes it's like feeling around in the dark. You're not sure.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So within specific for, let's say that I'm whatever, a CEO of a company that has 50 employees. What is we're talking about healthy masculinity, right? So what does it look like to have to be connected to your authentic self, to the hero authentic self? What does that look like within kind of the corporate environment?
so what I want to talk about in that regard is healthy vulnerability. So, for
Okay.
instance, in a corporate environment, Google did a study, and they had certain leaders of teams. The study is called the Aristotle Project. It's a well-known study. They spent millions of dollars. So
Okay.
they found that there were certain teams within Google where the leader. So this is a very corporate environment. Google, well known. If
Hmm.
you haven't heard of it, check it out. It's pretty cool. But Google, they did this project, and they're like, what is it about these teams? And they were studying it from all different angles. Like, is it certain skill sets? Is it certain combinations of skill sets? And what they determined was the number one factor after spending millions of dollars is a leader that can create psychological safety within their team, right? So if you're a CEO of 50, you've got to learn to develop the skill of creating psychological safety when you're leading meetings. And then they drilled down into that. One is team members feel free to bring new ideas to the table, and at least have them considered, right? Like, hey, I think
Okay.
we should do this. But also there's a safe space for that team member to also bring their struggles and their weaknesses to the team, right? To go, hey, I know I've got this deadline. I'm really struggling. Who can help me? Right? Like
Okay.
that's psychological safety. Like, I can bring new ideas, and when I'm struggling, I don't feel like I have to hide that from my team. I can just tell my team, "Hey, we got a deadline. I'm part of it. I'm struggling." Right?
So
So,
what does a leader have to do to create that, to model that?
right. So number one, yeah, pretty much that's the punchline. They do need to model it. So,
Okay.
um, and healthy vulnerability is modeling that. So that leader doesn't just welcome that from the team members, but that leader says, "Hey, I've got a new idea for the team. Want to know what you guys have to say about that?" Or, "Hey, I'm the leader of this team, and I'm struggling today." Like, like, so
Mm,
honestly, it's you and I've been part of different groups and communities, and one of the communities we were involved with was a men's group, and it was, hey, sometimes the most vulnerable person in the room is the most powerful person in the room.
yeah.
So to me, the key to healthy vulnerability, which is what a leader needs to create that psychological safety, is you don't have to share your deep dark secrets and your big deep struggles with your team, and but you do need to bring your strengths to the team, and you need to bring that humility and that vulnerability to the team, even if it's just being held in your heart, right? And so it'll come out in the way that you interact with people. If you come in, like, armored up every time
Yeah.
into a meeting, your team's not gonna feel psychologically safe, right? So it doesn't mean that you have to share everything with your team. That's the art form of it, but it meaning that, hey, but you show up with an openness and a vulnerability, and you allow your humanity to be seen, and that's different in every situation and every circumstance, and there's a lot to dive into there, but that's that's kind of the high level look at it.
Yeah, yeah. So how would a leader, because obviously we're using just an arbitrary example of a CEO of a company with 50 people. Um, High level, get all of that, but the up armor versus being connected to your heart. What are some really practical ways that a leader can stay both stay connected and grounded in their heart and their authentic self, as well as just manage the very real pressures and stresses of that leadership position?
Yeah. So number one, I've been the CEO of a company for the last 8 years. Recently that we changed that, and now I work for a private equity firm.
Okay.
But when I was faced with that, with those pressures, and that you have to understand when you're under a lot of pressure, your default performance self protective mechanisms are going to go into tilt, and you will likely armor up, you will likely lash out, you'll likely do something that isn't very, you're going to make mistakes, right? You're
Yeah.
going to under pressure. So I like to, in the heat of the battle, I like to have I have an Excel spreadsheet that probably has no less than 150 of what I'm about to describe. I call them anchors, right?
Okay.
So there's two things I'd recommend: anchors and catalytic behaviors. An anchor, number one, an anchor is something that is a pattern disruptor. So I have a bunch of links to surf videos right in my Excel sheet. I can get access to it in 5 minutes. I can change my state and be back to being kind of more chill, beachy Dave that likes surf videos, right? And that
Okay.
is the authentic me. Now that sounds kind of odd in the middle of the heat of the battle, but sometimes I need a pattern disrupt, right? Like I just need to take 5 minutes and breathe and go, wait a minute, I'm not acting like me. So I have certain writings, inspiring quotes. I have video links. I have just phrases that I literally have written out who I am outside of any role I play, and I can read that, and within a minute or two, it disrupts whatever crazy pattern is going off in me that makes
Mm,
me think that I'm bulletproof. Um, it both inspires me and connects me to my humanity. All these. So number one, those are anchors. Those are things that just very quickly, within a minute or two, can link me to that. If I don't have access to a computer, I have a file in my head of memories of like key moments in my life, peak moments, and also moments where I overcame adversity, and I just bring those to mind. So I have it built into my calendar. I'm so strategic about it that every hour and a half I have a 5 minute break. That's all I do. I call it my who time. I just go, who am I?
okay.
Who am I? Who am I? And then my key metric that I measure at the end of every day is what percentage of my day was I disconnected to myself and what percentage of my day was I connected to myself. That's a very subjective
Mm,
metric, right? So number one, it's anchors. And then number two, I think you really want to have two catalytic behaviors that ensure that you're going to stay centered to yourself every day. So a lot of people listening to this may already have these, and you just need to be more intentional about them. So for me, if I go for a hike or a mountain bike on the daily,
yeah.
I tend to stay in my center because the outdoors reflects to me. I'm very passionate about the outdoors. For someone else, it might be sitting in a corner and reading a book. For someone else, it might be meditation. For someone else, it might be getting a massage. But doing things that are propelling me forward, but they're making sure that my body, that my mind, that my emotions, that they're getting grounded into who I really am. So a lot of this stuff you might already be doing, and it's just about realizing how powerful it is, and how powerful connection to your true self is, and it's getting more intentional, and making them a priority, putting them in your calendar, and not letting too many days go by without executing on that, right? It's no
Yeah.
different than the key behaviors, the key performance indicators in your business. Like, you have key performance indicators, and one of them should be is how often am I disconnected from who I really am. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I remember when I was working with you in the you were coaching me. and you were working with me on this, and just to reflect back what you're saying in the sense of, um, yes, it's not an exact KPI in the sense of how connected was I to myself, but if you're honest with yourself, you get a sense of, yeah, I was really kicking ass today, and I showed up, or I didn't show up, right? Just a
Yeah.
super simple example. So I showed up as 100%. I was firing on all cylinders, and I checked out and snapped at my wife. And what I didn't show up, right, it would be a zero, right? And you can get, oh, I was
Yeah.
30%, I was 70%, etc. So it is fluid, but you can gauge and measure that. And then as you said, the things that you do to keep you connected there, you can feel that percentage shift in the direction that you desire.
Yeah, and sometimes even just writing an email, it could just be a very like confirming an appointment email, but you can feel that sounds like a really basic task that you could be having your worst day ever and still go, I'll see you tomorrow at 8 a.m. Like it's not a big deal. But you can feel when you're connected to that task and when it's when I'm disconnected from my truest self, even the most basic tasks feel either dull or laborious or even just like I might even have resentment towards basic tasks, which means that somewhere along the line I'm so you can be doing something as simple as writing an email and just pay attention. You're still
Yeah,
doing it. It's an awareness, right? This is to stimulate awareness because you need to make course corrections. And if you go several days or several weeks, you could find yourself not showing up on a particular day because all of a sudden you have a quote unquote mental health day, right?
sure. Yeah. Which that actually does bring up a question, which is, how do you juggle or how do you navigate? And I know a lot of these we're kind of talking high level, and if somebody works with you, they'll get into the weeds of all of this, but because it's different for everybody. But at least I'll speak for myself. What has been hard in the past, and even is still, I struggle with it at times now, is this whole uh, balancing act between being connected and, identifying my needs and staying connected to my identity and all of that, as well as pursuing goals and doing the tasks, doing the things,
Yeah,
right? So you have, because, like, I don't know, one extreme would be David Goggins, right? Fuck your emotions, you're an inner bitch, should tell him what to do. And just and
yeah,
he needed that, and that's his message. And I think a lot of times people that carry a strong message may push a little bit harder in one direction in order to punch through the veil of what people are talking about to get that message across, and it's
yeah.
important. But how do you maintain being a high performer, being a leader, being an executive, etc. So maintaining that high performance, um, and at times needing to essentially say, I've got to send this email, I've got to schedule this meeting, and it doesn't really matter how I feel. I mean, it does, but I need to push through that, or acknowledge that I may be wanting to run or check out or escape, or I'm feeling overwhelmed or whatever, to navigate, not dismissing your heart or suppressing your emotions, being emotionally present while still maintaining a high performance, goal oriented, task driven individual.
Yeah, so I build into my calendar margin for, and I don't mean I build it in like it's scheduled. Although I do have on purpose, I have margin in my calendar, knowing that these things are going to come up. So um, the irony is that um, when you're pushing forward and hitting goals, and those goals are in alignment with what you want for the company, what you want for yourself, what you want for your family, you are putting pressure. If you're going to do it and stay connected with your truest self, there is automatically built in. It's as certain as gravity. You're going to have to release some old constructs that have been holding you back, right? So
Okay.
rather than pretending that's not going to happen or shaming yourself when it does, build in space for it, right? So I'll give you an example, like a really extreme example. Um, I've been more consistent with my physical health than I've ever been in my whole adult life. and I've got a lot of trauma in my past, a lot, like more than most people. So I know that I need to build in space for myself, and oftentimes it doesn't take very long. So I made a commitment to myself and my training partner. I'm going to run every day for so many days. And one morning I woke up and it felt like something in me. I felt like a victim. I felt sorry for myself. There was just all these weird, kind of unattractive emotions inside of me that I didn't, when I picture Goggins, I'm like, Goggins wouldn't be doing this. So, but I'm like, but I am. And I'm not Goggins. And I know that Goggins also probably had moments like this. So my body was trying to stop me from running. So I crawled on my hands and my knees into my closet. And I cried as I put my running shoes on. It was like a little kid that was scared to do something that I knew as an adult wasn't scared. I'm just going to go for a jog. I'm not going to have drill sergeants yelling at me. Nobody's going to be, it's just a jog.
Yeah.
But I crawled. And thank God, I was kind of glad no one's here to see this, but I really wanted to make it out to the run. But I was releasing all that, whatever was being released. I couldn't figure it out. I didn't stop to figure it out. I didn't journal. I just crawled to the door. I got outside. I stood up. I began to jog. And within 3 minutes, I was crying. And then the clouds parted. And I felt like I'd faced down some invisible bully inside my life.
Wow.
Right. And I went, what just happened? What was that? So to put it more in an executive standpoint, I've been on the road, been invited to meet with a buyer of a big retail chain, been scared, wondering if I'm prepared. I've flown to a different city. I've dreaded the meeting because I just feel this sense of I'm not worthy enough of this. I don't know if I'm going to do well, all that stuff. And I just cry in the parking lot, right? Just release it. Cry, yell, whatever the emotion is, just be in touch with it. It felt terrifying. Like, I can't let myself go here right now. I need to be put together to be in this meeting. The irony was when I released, I was way more present in the meeting. I had a much higher chance. So it's reprogramming this resistance. We all have this resistance to kind of let go of the old self so we can move into the new self. And so I think it's an openness and a willingness to not run away from that and to face your own internal bully. There's a bully that there's an inner critic. There's a victim. There's some part of us that lives in us that repulses us no matter. And honest, the irony is the higher up you go in leadership, the more that stuff surfaces. And so to pretend to assume it's not going to happen is ridiculous. And to normalize it and then release it, it's the most liberating thing ever. It's like a muscle. It takes a little while to get used to. But you can get really good at that. You can get really good at that. And it's actually a very powerful trait and an attitude to have.
I love that. I actually just recently did it was a back-to-back weekend event it was a lot of somatic work, which was essentially the short version, intentionally triggering you and then teaching you how to move through that, right? That's taking 12 days of training and putting it down into a sentence, right? but it's a lot of what you just described, right?
But interesting, 5 days of training because you have to find ways to train yourself to do that. So get into places where you can practice this stuff in a safe place, right? Like 5 days of somatic training or get into therapy or get into whatever, like looking for ways to disrupt the patterns that cause the stuff to dam up and begin to learn how to release it. So, somatic stuff.
And like you said, I mean, there was a moment that, we did this exercise and then kind of what we did afterwards is circled back and did kind of popcorn. This is what came up for me or whatever. And we were sitting there and all of a sudden I started like physically violently shaking, terrified, because it was basically, we were sharing what we didn't want other people to know about us. We were saying that out loud and then breathing through that and releasing that and letting that go. Right. And I shared something, it was honest, but then sitting there, I was like, actually, a lot of times I feel like a scared little boy. And that's what I really don't want you to know about me.
Right.
And my point in all of that is I stood up, I shared that, and I mean, it was even hard. My jaw was shaking, I was quivering, I felt terrified to let people see that part of me.
Right.
And but I released it, right? I let that go and then did some breath work and grounded after that. But kind of like your run, I felt so free and not only validated because I was loved in response to that insecurity that I had, but I felt like physically felt lighter and more present because one, I faced that thing, kind of like you crawling and putting your shoes on. And then two, pushed like released it and pushed through it. And on the other side, it's a lot like going to the gym, right? You don't want to go to the gym, you go to the gym, you work out, you're like, I feel so much better because you've physically obviously moved your body, etc. But emotionally you can do that too.
Yep. I mean, for lack of a better analogy, it is learning to emotionally work out and build those muscles, um, and you know, to not. I mean, it when you're in a non-triggered state, it sounds great. Like, of course, I'll do that. I mean, why wouldn't
Sure.
I do that, right?
Yeah.
Well, but when you're the person that's being triggered, um, just know that you can do it alone, but you do need to find at least two or three people,
Yeah.
where you can let your guard down. And even if you go through it, it's helpful to have a few people witness it and give you feedback, because it's not something that I recommend doing alone.
Yeah.
I
It's
mean,
the old saying.
even the sea. It's an old saying. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say the old saying, people hurt you and people will heal you, right? Like
Yeah,
being seen
exactly.
in that.
I mean, the people that go through BUDS, the Navy SEAL training, they always say that the lone wolves don't make it through there. They're like
Mhm.
bulletproof. You can't make it through BUDS without other people, right? You got to carry a boat with people. You got to do things that are really hard, and you aren't going to make it on your own. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I am like this is a curveball kind of out of left field, but I'm curious of your thoughts on this because I've been weighing this for myself, in relationship, but because of our conversation today within the realm of kind of the executive realm and the business world, there's all this conversation around masculinity, femininity, right? And I'm not going to get into like the cultural debate around that, but specific to our conversation, um, how does it, if I'm a grounded, connected man that is a leader, what does it look like to make space for the healthy feminine within the realm of business? Because what I feel happens a lot and what I've seen is that a lot of times women who adapt to or embrace more of the masculine are the ones that are promoted or recognized or move through their career, and that oftentimes the feminine, which is it's creative, it's chaotic, it's beautiful, it's all of that, but it's necessary to have both. What does it look like to be a grounded, authentic male leader in the business environment, in a way that makes space for the feminine in a healthy way?
you know, the older I get, the the more I'm going to say something. I've I've been I'm a heterosexual man, but I've been mislabeled as gay, right? Because I have some quote unquote feminine characteristics, right? Like
Okay.
I've been called a sensitive man. I've been called, you're just not like most men, or I've been friend zoned a lot, like, because it's like, um, because especially by women that probably are attracted to toxic masculinity in a way that's actually not healthy for them too,
Yeah.
so not labeling. So I I think I've just stopped labeling those parts of me. You know, I have not. I don't even think of myself as feminine or masculine. I I coach a lot of young men, and there's this burning question: is am I a real man? Am I a real man yet? Like, think about, we all crave approval from our fathers, you know, as men. And it's like, and so my answer to that is, a real man is, you become a real man when you're a real man. When you just stop judging and categorizing any part of yourself and just go, this is my most authentic expression. And is it going to have some feminine traits? Heck yeah, it is. Is it
Yeah.
going to have some super? I mean, I could in certain moments, a wounded woman could label me as a toxic man. You know, I finished a triathlon. I'm just like, yeah. They're like, oh my god, that guy is scary, right? Yeah, I am scary right now. I'm pumped. I'm jacked. I just
Yeah.
ran a triathlon. You know, like,
Yeah.
damn straight, I'm gonna growl and, you know, like.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And then there's
Absolutely.
other moments where, you know, I'm, you know, quote unquote, crying like a little girl. You know, same guy, right? Like, look at that guy. What's wrong with that guy? He's crying. He's watching a Barbie movie with his daughter and crying while he's eating popcorn. What's the deal with that dude? You know.
Yeah.
So I think, not to oversimplify the answer, but is just, again, just to go back to how we started the call, like, make room to just have these expressions happen, and then you get to decide via your own filters and the feedback that you're getting, like, is this an authentic expression, or is this some distorted version of my authenticity? And, you know, there's a lot of programming, there's a lot of reason to shrink away from a certain expression. But, you know, when I'm proud that I watched Barbie movies with my daughter and cried with her. I'm not
Sure.
ashamed of that at all. Now, I'm also, there's other times though where I've really been a coward, and I've quote unquote called it my feminine side, but I was really being a coward. You know, but
What do you mean by
I've
that?
had, I mean, like, um, what's the right example? You know what? I'm just going to stay home and take care of myself today. And really,
Mm,
I'm just afraid to go to work, right? Like, hey, I'm just going to
okay.
take, like, it's a fine line between self-care and cowardice, you know? And
Ooh. There we go. Now we're getting to the meat of things.
so, you know, and, you know, the day goes by, and then I do a debrief the next day. I'm like, oh crap, I wasn't doing self-care. I was being a coward. So,
How do you know the difference?
great question. Um, Sometimes I don't, but hindsight is 2020. So, you know, I just stay in that honest assessment place. And, you know, I and I'm also open to feedback from the people that are closest to me. So, you know, my wife has called me out on it a few times, you know, like, hey,
Okay.
are you, what, this is your third self-care day in a row. What's going on? What are you actually
Okay.
caring? What are you actually caring for? You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and, you know, of course, when I get called out like that, I can be really defensive. I'm like, well, you don't understand. Like, I've got this infection, and I da 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 da. You know, and she's like, okay, well, you look like you could. You look like you could at least function at a basic level. Like, I think maybe you've taken this too far. And so,
Okay.
number one, it's just, again, being open to feedback, and number two is, you start to feel it in your gut. You just, there's this guilt. You know, there's a
There's a knowing that you're misaligned from your authentic self.
yeah, all of a sudden I'm outside the hero story, and I'm either in the villain story or the coward story. I'm in one of those other stories, and you can feel it when it creeps in. It's like, oh crap, I did it again. You know?
Yeah.
Um, yep.
How do you, speaking of feedback, how do you gauge? Gauge is probably the wrong word. Like, getting feedback from either too many people or the wrong people can lead you in the wrong direction.
Yep.
And obviously, you could say feedback is online criticism. That's easy to dismiss. I don't know them. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about people that you know, um, or even let's keep it in the business realm, right? You've got a manager that is not connected, that is not in a healthy place, and that feedback is either one, just not accurate, or two, manipulative or controlling, etc.
Yep.
Um, and I've seen people that will take that in and then wrap that either manipulative or broken or dysfunctional feedback and wrap that around their identity, and
Yep.
then kind of lose themselves within their job. Right? They
Sure.
want to be authentic, but because they're open to feedback, it creates a double-edged sword where that openness to feedback actually causes them to kind of lose their identity. So the
Yeah.
question in that is, how do you how do you navigate which feed, like it's an awesome quality, it's a leadership quality, it takes courage. All of that's true to be open to feedback. Great. How do you know which feedback to actually take in and take an honest inventory of what needs to change?
Great question. Um, Again, I'm going to be a little bit like a one track record, but
Yeah.
like you've got to double down on your who a lot. So, and interestingly enough, one of the most strategic things that I see that keeps you connected. So that feedback always needs to be tested against your authentic self. Well, if you don't have a decent idea of who you are, if you're still somewhat in flow about who you are, you're going to get tossed around by that feedback, right? So
Mm,
I often prescribe for my executives like intentional recreation as like it's one of the fastest ways I know to get into that, you know, that authentic place. Um, because when you're hanging out with your friends that you let your guard down with, you naturally feel safe and you self-express and you get to experience yourself with people that love you and care for you. You also, when you're hanging around with people that, so you have to surround yourself with people. Your manager at work, you may or may not be able to control, at least in the short term, right? So
mhm.
you've got to regroup and get around people that know you and see you and go and vent and go, this manager is telling me this. I think there's some truth in it, but it's really confusing the crud out of me. You've
Yeah.
got to find healthy mirrors, right? Like people that can mirror
Mm,
back to you. And a lot of us don't actually have that. Like it's taken me years to, and I sometimes don't want a group of healthy mirrors because I want to stay in denial, right? So
sure.
even
Yeah.
when you have those great friendships, it's like, yeah, I don't really want to talk to them because I kind of like this little hiding thing I'm doing right now, right?
Yeah.
So it's being intentional, finding the right community or the right group of friends or whatever that are going to give you the kind of feedback that you feel in your gut is helping you grow. And if you've got people that are in your life that are by role and design giving you feedback because that's their role and they're a manager and they need to give you that feedback,
Yeah.
you can have a good healthy place to go vent that off and sort through. Every manager though, if they're giving you feedback, even if it's really distorted and toxic, there's good data in it.
That's a
So
good point.
you creating a healthy, um, I'll put it this way: the human condition is we are in constant conflict all the time. There's tension every single day between authentic human expression, really expressing who you are, and conformity. And you actually need conformity too, because we are tribal, we are community, we do things better in groups. So conformity isn't the enemy, right?
Yeah.
Like, but conformity at the expense of authentic human expression is. And when you're a kid, you're you're in a family group and your very survival depends more heavily on conformity, right? When you
Yeah.
become an adult, conformity becomes less necessary, but you have some old patterns where authentic human expression can feel like I'm not going to make it. I'm going to be
Mm,
breaking bonds with my family. And so really what we're talking about here with executive emotional, it really boils down to, in a lot of ways, how do I navigate my old patterns of conformity that no longer serve me, replace them with new patterns of conformity that do serve me, and then and then how do I continually authentically express and grow and grow and grow. Um, and honestly, I think a lot of emotional health issues, depression, anxiety, are literally, the root is we're not navigating that well. We're
Mm,
still stuck in some old conformity patterns that don't serve us anymore.
yeah, I love that. I've never really heard it put that way, and I think you hit the nail on the head on that one. I was thinking of the the healthy mirrors. We have a mutual friend, Blair, and I was a healthy mirror for him. We used to all three of us used to live in California together, and he said to me a few times, he's like, Josh, I literally want to throw my keys at you and hug you at the same time because I feel so exposed by what you're saying to me. So like I want my responses, I want to hide from this or reject it or push it away. And yet the deeper part of me loves being seen and called out and celebrated and loved in that way. So it's if you want to punch somebody and hug them at the same time, they may or may not be a healthy mirror. It's just an indicator.
Well, I just have to brag on you. You've done that for me as well. I remember specifically in a hallway where a lot of us worked. I remember walking in that hallway and telling you something, and you just went, "Can I tell you something?" And I wanted to punch you and hug you at the same time. Like why did I say yes to that? Why didn't I just say no and tell him I'm busy? Why did I let him speak into my life?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Um, all right. Well, we do need to wrap this up, but I do one question I was asked. I've asked it to you before, but I'd be curious to see if it's changed. You get one billboard, 1 billion people see it. What does it say?
It says two words. It says reveal yourself.
Ooh, that was not what you said last time. I think it was love yourself last time, if I
Yeah.
remember correctly. But reveal yourself.
Yeah.
Whoo! The most exciting and terrifying thing you can do in life.
Yeah. There's a Latin phrase, and I wish I could remember the Latin because I would sound so smart, but I can't. But it's you can interpret the Latin, but it says it's so simple. It's a mantra that I try to live by. It's like I want to be rather than to appear.
Mm,
Like
yeah.
when I do triathlons or I go to these events, there's all these people with their gear and their lycra and they've got their Garmins and they've got everything, and then you see them out there. You're like a you're just barely starting. Why did you invest so much in the gear? Why don't you just, And then there's other people that are like stripped down. They've got like ragged shorts and they look like they're and they're the ones that kill it. Like
Okay.
it's interesting how much energy we go into appearing. Now I'm not against that because truthfully, sometimes looking the part and feeling the part can help you enter into it. But it's
Sure.
just there's a sometimes it's just better just to be than to appear. So, yeah.
Yeah. I love that. Um, well, hey man, thank you so much for this conversation. I know that every time we talk, I glean things from it. You're one of my healthy mirrors. I so appreciate you. Um, if people are prompted by this conversation or maybe even feel challenged by it, but don't, like you said, maybe they don't have those mirrors or they're a high performer and they're in that position of leadership where they're the CEO. They're the ones running the show, so
Yeah.
they may have some friends, but they got to hold together that company, etc. Where can they find you, possibly work with you, learn from you, glean from
Yeah.
you beyond just this podcast?
Best place is executive-emotional-health.com. It's
Okay.
exactly. If you know how to spell executive and emotional, put those two words together, executive emotional health, all one word.com. There's a course on there called The Catalyst. It's a 3-week course that would really prime the pump. It's self-guided. It takes 3 weeks to complete. It will really give you a good solid foundation. And then there's several ways to go deeper on there. I do that. I'm doing that with my partner on that, Blair Reynolds, who we mentioned on this call. So that's probably the best place to go. And I will say this, regardless of whether it's me or Josh or anybody, you need, most likely, most people on this call need to, from time to time, if not regularly, pay somebody to give you that mirror space. Like
Mm,
even though I have mirror friends like you, I still very often pay people, because when you pay someone to do that for you, you're getting undivided attention, and you very rarely in life have that one-sided place where you can just say it all and have
Yeah.
someone reflect back to you. So if you're not doing that, or if you haven't done that, I would also recommend doing that like yesterday.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And obviously, the all the links and everything will be in the show notes as well. So, whether, like Dave said, whether it be me or him or anyone else, I like I said just a month ago, I was in a 2 weekend event with 100 people in the room, and it was super intense. Like the process doesn't stop, and going at it, like you said, as the lone wolf, more times than not will lead to failure. So. All right. Well, Dave, thank you so much. I love you,
Thank you.
man.
Love you
I'm
too.
glad you carved out the time to have the conversation. I know people are going to glean a lot from it.
Right on. Thanks, Josh.
All right. We'll see you next time.
See you.